Imagine living in a time where a simple rumor could end your life. A jealous rival, a suspicious priest, even your own family could point a finger and you would never see the sun again. The medieval witch trials were about fear, power, and control, far more than mere superstition. Women, men, and even children were dragged from their homes, tortured into false confessions, and sentenced to deaths so horrific that modern horror stories pale in comparison. The worst part was that their persecutors truly believed they were doing the work of God. It all began with whispers of dark magic and unholy pacts with the devil. The Catholic Church, locked in a war against heresy, saw witches as an even greater threat, servants of Satan hiding in plain sight. In 1487, two Dominican inquisitors published Malleus Maleficarum, the Witch Hammer, a guide to hunting, torturing, and executing witches. It claimed women were weak, sinful, and easily seduced by the devil, that accusation was as good as guilt, and that confessions even under torture were undeniable proof. Fear spread like wildfire. Rulers and inquisitors used witchcraft hysteria to silence enemies, crush dissent, and tighten their grip on society. Once accused, escape was impossible. The tests were nothing but death sentences disguised as justice. The water ordeal bound the accused and threw them into a river. Sink and you were innocent but drowned, float and you were guilty and burned. Then came the search for the devil's mark, a mole or scar pricked with needles, sometimes using retractable blades to guarantee evidence. Confessions were extracted with torture devices like the thumbscrew and the leg crusher, splintering bones until victims begged for death. These trials were not justice. They were public spectacles designed to terrify and control. Each dunking, each execution fed the hysteria until no one was safe. Submerged, dunked, and held under until panic took over, the accused confessed simply to stop the torment. Mercy never came. The strappado followed, wrists bound behind the back, the victim hoisted high, then dropped just enough to rip shoulders from their sockets. The sound of joints snapping, tendons tearing, and ligaments breaking was enough to shatter the strongest spirit. This was never about justice, it was about power, control, and fear. When guilt was declared, the true nightmare began. Some witch hunts grew so massive they became legend. In 1675, the Torsacre witch trials in Sweden saw whispers of witchcraft turn into mass extermination. Children testified, priests led investigations, and neighbors accused neighbors. On one day alone, 71 people, 65 women and 6 men, were beheaded on a hilltop. Their heads were set on spikes, their bodies discarded, and the priest who orchestrated the slaughter never faced justice. In Germany, the Würzburg and Bamberg trials became industrial-scale purges. Prince-bishops built prisons like the Witch House, filled with torture racks and chains. Hundreds, merchants, scholars, children as young as 7, were burned alive. Over 1,000 victims were executed, their ashes scattered to erase them from memory. Spain's Basque witch trials brought the Inquisition's ruthless efficiency to the hunt. Over 7,000 accused, mass arrests, endless interrogations, and women condemned simply for being seen as weak-minded and vessels of sin. Hundreds were burned, their deaths declared a cleansing of the land. Scotland became one of the deadliest places for accused witches. King James VI's obsession with demons fueled over 4,000 accusations and 2,500 executions. Entire villages were wiped out. In North Berwick, 70 people were accused of summoning storms to sink the king's ship and were burned alive at Edinburgh Castle. No one was safe, pregnant women tortured until they miscarried, children executed on testimony alone, and elders burned simply for living too long. These trials were not random acts of superstition, they were systematic campaigns of fear, crushing entire communities under the weight of paranoia and power. No one was safe. Accusation meant death, and trials became spectacles. Rituals of suffering meant to terrify the living. Burning at the stake was the ultimate warning. The crowd gathered as a trembling woman was tied to a post, ropes cutting into her skin. The priest read last rites, but there was no salvation. Torches touched the wood, flames roared to life, and death came slowly. Clothes ignited first, then hair. Skin blistered, split, and blackened as screams echoed. Some died of smoke inhalation, others endured until fire reached their organs. But burning was not the worst fate. Some were boiled alive in oil, water, or molten lead, flesh peeling away as they cooked from the outside in. Others faced the brazen bull, locked inside a bronze statue, roasted as their screams echoed through pipes like a roaring animal turning agony into spectacle. Then came devices designed not just to kill but to mutilate. The Pear of Anguish, a metal device inserted into the mouth or worse, its petals cranked open to shatter jaws or rupture organs. The breaking will turned death into days of torment, shattering bones one by one before weaving limbs into its spokes and leaving victims to die under the open sky, vultures circling. Perhaps the most horrifying was being sawn in half. The victim hung upside down, kept alive by blood rushing to the brain. The saw cut slowly from groin downward, each stroke deliberate, the victim conscious for most of it until death finally arrived. These punishments were never about justice, they were acts of terror meant to control entire communities. Fear spread like wildfire, turning neighbors into accusers. A child's scream, a failed crop, a sudden sickness, anything could start the next hunt. In village after village, suspicion became contagion, and soon no one was safe. In the age of witch hunts, no one was safe. A healer with herbs, a girl who missed church, a farmer whose neighbor's cow died, all could be accused. Denial only fueled suspicion, and soon neighbors turned on neighbors, husbands accused wives, children pointed at their mothers. Even priests leading the hunts were sometimes dragged to the stake. Once the bloodlust began, it did not stop until executions satisfied the crowd. Mass trials became scenes of frenzy. In Germany, entire families, mothers, fathers, children as young as 7, were burned alive overnight. In Scotland, a single trial could condemn 50 at once, their bodies dumped into mass graves. In France, 600 were executed in one town until even the executioners grew weary. These were not acts of justice but eruptions of chaos, fueled by jealousy, revenge, and greed. Many were targeted not for witchcraft but for who they were, a beautiful young woman envied by rivals, a widow with land, a midwife blamed for a child's death, or a woman who rejected a powerful man. Once accused, guilt was assumed, and defending oneself only made things worse. Some women betrayed others hoping to save themselves, but mercy never came. After weeks of torture, many confessed to impossible crimes, flying to Sabbaths, feeding children to demons, sleeping with the devil, anything to stop the pain. Confession only guaranteed death, often public and humiliating. By the time the hysteria burned out, tens of thousands were dead, villages emptied, entire regions scarred by their own fear. Yet the legacy lived on. In 1692, Salem repeated the nightmare, 200 accused, 19 hanged, 1 crushed beneath stones. Friends betrayed friends, families were destroyed. The pattern never truly ended. History shows that fear, when left unchecked, always finds new scapegoats. Yesterday it was witches, today it may be anyone labeled a threat. The question remains, how many more lives will be lost before we learn that fear, not witches, is the true enemy?